Welcome to my channel, Botswana Thinking Law, where I bring you and the law closer. Today on this channel, we're going to be talking about transfer duty and capital transfer tax. This is the last and final part on the series on land. And I hope you've gotten a lot of information in relation to land. If there's anything that you feel I haven't covered in relation to land, or you want me to clarify, please leave comments down below. Leave comments on my social media on Facebook. Leave comments on my Twitter. Before we get started in this video, we're going to put in a disclaimer. This is not legal advice. This is simply a sharing of general information. If you have a problem of a legal nature, please engage the services of an attorney. Now back to our video. Transfer duty is dealt with under the Transfer Duty Act together with its various amendments. Transfer duty is a duty that is paid by a person who is buying or acquiring a piece of property or rights in a piece of property. The reason why I say buying, acquiring a piece of property or rights is because in certain instances it is not possible to buy the piece of property, and you would have learned this in our series when we go through it dealing with land, especially when it comes to tribal land. So for example, lease. A lease is not buying the property, but it is acquiring or buying rights, title, and interest that a person has in that particular piece of tribal property. Transfer duty is calculated differently depending on who it is that has to pay the transfer duty. And what I mean by that is, if the person who has to pay transfer duty is a citizen, and if the person is a non-citizen, then calculation is different. The calculation for transfer duty paid by a citizen is that you first deduct 1 million from the purchase price or the value of the property. And that is because transfer duty is paid on either the value or the purchase price, depending on whichever is higher. And it is for that reason that every transaction has to have a valuation that is not older than 2 years. If the purchase price is higher, then the transfer duty is based on the purchase price. If the valuation is higher, then the transfer duty is based on the valuation. If a property has the same purchase price and valuation, let's say 1.2 million, and the person who has the duty to pay the transfer duty is a citizen, then you deduct the first 1 million. And transfer duty is then calculated as 5% of what remains. In this example, 5% would be on the 200,000 because the property is valued at 1.2 and it is also being sold for 1.2. However, if the person who has the duty to pay this transfer duty is a non-citizen, then there is no amount that is deducted. Instead, transfer duty is paid at 30% of the value or the purchase price, whichever is higher. Capital transfer tax, however, is dealt with by the Capital Transfer Tax Act and its various amendments. The difference between capital transfer tax and transfer duty when it comes to immovable property, and remember, we're only going to be talking about capital transfer tax in relation to immovable property in this video, not any other capital transfer tax. The difference is that capital transfer tax for immovable property applies where the immovable property is being donated. And that means where the immovable property is not being bought. So it is given away for free. Capital transfer tax has to be paid by the donee. So the donor is the person that gives the property away, and the donee is the person that receives the property. Capital transfer tax is paid on the value of the property. It cannot rely on the purchase price, because in this situation, it is considered that there is no purchase price because there is a donation. However, the property then has to be valued, and the capital transfer tax is paid on the valuation. The calculation for payment of capital transfer tax is that for the first 100,000, a person pays 2%. For the first 200,000, a person pays 3%. For the second 200,000, a person pays 4%. And then for whatever remains after that, they pay 5%. So when we continue on our example of a property valued at 1.2, for the first 100,000, they pay 2%, leaving an amount of 1.1. And then for the first 200,000, they pay 3%, leaving an amount of 900,000. For the second 200,000, they pay 4%, leaving an amount of 700,000. And then on this 700,000, they pay 5%. The capital transfer tax will be an addition of all of these percentages to make one amount of money. And this is where a person is not a company. This is because a company pays a different percentage, and this does not matter whether a company is resident in Botswana or not. The percentage of capital transfer tax that has to be paid by a company is 12.5% of the valuation. There are exemptions for payment of both capital transfer tax and transfer duty. And these exemptions also appear in the acts outlined above. The exemptions for transfer duty are that if a person is inheriting from their spouse upon the passing away of that spouse, then they don't pay transfer duty. When a child inherits from their parent after the parent has passed away, they don't pay transfer duty. If you are a joint owner of a piece of property and you subdivide that property in order for one person to have their own title deed and the other person to have their own title deed, there is no transfer duty paid. However, if the person of portion 1 wants to take over portion 2, then they have to pay transfer duty for taking over of portion 2. Even if they haven't subdivided the property, if one wants to buy the undivided complete share of the other, then they have to pay transfer duty for that undivided complete share. A person will also not pay transfer duty if they are changing the name on a property from one spouse to another. So let's say a husband has a piece of property and they want to transfer it to the wife, or the wife has a piece of property and they want to transfer it to the husband. There is no transfer duty that is paid for that transaction. If a person owns 100% of the shares in a company, or they together with their spouse own 100% of the shares in a company, and this person wants to transfer their immovable property to the company, there is no transfer duty payable. Or if the company is the one that owns the immovable property and it is 100% owned by a person or jointly with the spouse, then the property can be transferred from the company to one of the spouses or both spouses without payment of transfer duty. If people get divorced and the property is transferred to one of the former spouses as a result of that divorce, then there is no transfer duty that is paid. And you have to bear in mind that it doesn't make a difference in this exemptions whether or not these people are married in or out of community of property. A person can also be exempted from paying transfer duty if they receive a waiver from the minister. However, this waiver can only, in terms of the Transfer Duty Act, be given in relation to citizens. A person is also exempt from paying transfer duty if the transaction attracts VAT. What I mean by this is, if the company that is selling a piece of property is registered for VAT and that company charges VAT for the sale of that property, then it doesn't matter whether the person is a citizen or non-citizen, they have to pay the 14% VAT. Instead, the citizen does not pay transfer duty. The non-citizen, however, has to pay the remaining 16% of the transfer duty to make 30%. Why? Because the exemption is only to the extent of the percentage of the VAT payable. And because for citizens the transfer duty is 5%, it is less than the VAT. One of the exemptions for transfer duty for citizens is if a citizen is buying property that they intend to use as their home, and they are buying this for the first time, then they do not pay transfer duty at all. No matter what the valuation is, no matter what the purchase price is. This means if the person is buying a house for the first time to use as their home for 5 million, then they are not paying any transfer duty. It has to be for the first time though. If you have been a joint owner of a residential property before, then you do not qualify for this exemption. The other exemption is that if a transaction is a donation, there is no transfer duty that is paid. However, as previously explained, the tax that will apply in respect of this immovable property will be the capital transfer tax. However, the capital transfer tax also has its exemptions. The exemptions for payment of capital transfer tax are inheritance, where a spouse inherits a piece of property from the other spouse, and it doesn't matter whether they are married in or out of community of property. The other exemption is where this person is exempt from paying transfer duty. So it means that if you are exempt from paying transfer duty, then you are also exempt from paying capital transfer tax. These are some of the examples of the exemptions of both transfer duty and capital transfer tax that a person can use. If a person inherits a piece of property in terms of the deceased estate, and they do not qualify for any exemption, either under the Capital Transfer Tax or the Transfer Duty Act, then there has to be a deduction on capital transfer of the first 100,000. So if they're inheriting a property valued for 500,000, there is a deduction of the first 100,000, meaning it is not charged. So these other percentages will be on the 400,000 that is left over. But if you want more in-depth detail, please talk to a tax specialist so that they can advise you on the various other taxes that you might have to pay which are not covered by capital transfer tax or transfer duty. Thank you for joining me. Please like, share, subscribe, ring the notification bell, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!